Hello and welcome to another standard gameplay video here on the official MTG Arena channel. This week we're doing things a little bit differently. Instead of submitting and playing my own deck, I've received a submission from user Vyvanse and this monowhite tokens deck that I'll be taking for a spin in best of 3 actually, since they also submitted a sideboard, and this is their take on monowhite tokens, including Ojer Taq, Deepest Foundation, a 6 mana 6/6 god with vigilance that can triple or token production, and then even if it dies it can still transform into a land, which can eventually transform back into the god. It's an awesome curve topper for any tokens deck. Then we also have Mondrak, which can double our tokens, so the dream is to get both Mondrak and our white god on the battlefield at the same time to go completely nuts. And then of course we've got plenty of token makers throughout. At 2 mana we also have quite a bit of removal with Fateful Absence and the new Get Lost, another flexible answer that can also go after enchantments. And then a Spellbook Vendor, a solid 2-drop that can pay 1 mana each turn to create a Sorcerer Roll token. So if we're going wide with a bunch of tokens, we're not going to run out of creatures that we can enchant with these roll tokens, and that can also give us more card selection to find the right cards at the right time. Then a Virtue of Loyalty, also great, making a 2/2 knight at instant speed, and then later we can cast the enchantment, which will pump up our tokens and various creatures as well, untapping them in the process. So it's a 2-drop, but also sort of a 5-drop. Then at 3 mana, 4 copies of Wedding Announcement, probably doesn't need an introduction, probably the best token maker in Standard. And the Discerning Financier can hopefully double up its treasure tokens to generate a huge mana advantage in this build. Then at 4 mana we've got a ton of options, with Archangel Elspeth making more soldier tokens with a lifelink. The Cemetery Protector gives us a bit of graveyard hate, as well as maybe a steady supply of human tokens if we can exile the right card types. Then Mondrak, as we mentioned, can double our tokens, can also become indestructible if we sacrifice some artifacts and or creatures. Wandering Emperor is a great removal that can also generate Samurai tokens, and then the Thousand Moons Smithy can also generate a very large gnome soldier, and if we've got enough tokens in play we can also transform it into a legendary land that can generate even more of those tokens. And then at 5 mana we've got a Fun-Off Sunfall, which can maybe reset the board, and then Rabble Rousing can also be awesome once it starts going off with multiple tokens, especially if any of our legendary creatures are involved. And then at 6 mana, besides our god, we've got 2 copies of Sanctuary Warden as a nice flying creature that can generate card advantage and citizen tokens, and the Eternal Wanderer can also be an awesome planeswalker for those grindier matchups, can also reset the board, make Samurai tokens with double strike, and can maybe even flicker creatures like Sanctuary Warden to keep making tokens. And then our mana base has 20 planes, 2 copies of Hidden Courtyard, which can also be a nice mana sink, letting us discover 4, and then 2 copies of Iganjo, giving us a bit more interaction. And then I'll quickly go over the sideboard, where we've got more removal with Destroy Evil, can go after enchantments or large creatures. Then the Shield of Argive, we've got 3 of those, 1 at the bottom here too, can be quite effective when facing blue decks with lots of counter spells, as our opponent won't be able to cast them during our turn. And then a Farewell can come in against creature-heavy decks, can also deal with graveyards, artifacts, or enchantments. And then Ossification is a nice cheap removal spell that takes advantage of our heavy basic land count. And then Seal from Existence, another versatile removal spell that can go after various permanents. So yeah, that's the deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Okay, we're on the draw, and we've got a nice opener here. Announcements into some 4-drops. Well, let's see what we're up against. Blue-white. Now we can even make a token end of turn. And then hopefully we'll draw a few more lanes. Opponent's got their own Wedding Announcement. We could also use Get Lost here to deny them from even making a single token, which I'm not opposed to. So we'll make sure to Get Lost before it triggers. And then we get to slime down our own Wedding Announcement. Now we can also exile an enchantment with the Protector. And then once we play more enchantments, we'll get more tokens as well. Our opponent passes with 4 mana up. So I'm going to start by attacking. If our opponent is planning to use a Wandering Emperor to ambush my 1/1, then we can give it a +1 counter and first strike. I suppose there is the Anchorage as well, so that could turn into a 2/3. Would be a little strange for them to activate it into 4 open mana though. And it's going to be a Tidebinder instead. So no trigger for it to really counter here. And our Wandering Emperor line could work out if our opponent doesn't have any interaction for 1 mana. Looks like they might also have a cut down. Okay, so that did not quite pan out. Still get to make a 1-1 on defense. They can now start pressuring our Planeswalker, including with creature land. And our Rafine is next. So the Tidebinder is gonna pick up a +1 counter perhaps from Connive. Most likely gonna chump. Yeah, I think I still chump, that way Emperor could just -2 on the Tidebinder at least. And then we did draw land, which is good. Yeah, I think I don't mind the -2. Making a knight and then maybe immediately going for Virtue of Loyalty is also an option. Opponent might also have a counterspell up, like Make Disappear, so flashing in the Protector might be the way to go. Otherwise we could have exiled the opponent's land and then played a land to immediately make a token. Still probably interested in exiling a land here, since there's no creature. Opponent getting rid of another Rafine. So now we could also exile a creature, which yeah, is certainly reasonable here, since we've got 2 more creatures in hand. And a Deep Cavern Bat is going to try and have a look. We'll play Protector in response. And looks like they might be considering a counterspell. And there's a Make Disappear, so they probably had that last turn as well. They get to take away one of our expensive cards. Might go for Virtue, which is the only card we can currently cast. Although Sanctuary Warden might be a bigger problem once it hits the battlefield. And Warden it is. Okay, so we need some good draws here. Don't know if Virtue by itself is gonna help outrace a Deep Cavern Bat. Another Wedding Announcement means probably just attack and then make a bunch of tokens. I may as well main phase this to play around another Make Disappear. And then next turn we've got a decent play lined up with Virtue. Opponent really wants to grow that lifelinker. And reveals another Tidebinder, which can counter the triggered ability on Virtue of Loyalty, which would be pretty effective. Although I guess it doesn't shut down enchantments at least, so would only be for 1 turn, so our opponent does not keep it. And the bats are likely to pick up more counters. Our deck does not have a ton of removal in game 1 to deal with the bat. But maybe we can just overpower them with what we have in play. Yeah, currently going for Virtue of Loyalty is certainly an option. Still have to be careful with attacking into the Anchorage, which can turn into a 2-3. So I might just send the Knight token, also so we get to make more tokens with Announcement. Alternative is Vendor and then pay the 1, and then I can maybe attack with 2 creatures. I think we go for Virtue and then see if they have a counterspell. And if they do, then I'm safe to attack with more than just a Knight. That resolves. So now it's just a Knight attacking. Could see Naigancho to take it out. Their own Virtue, ×2 perhaps. Okay. So want to make sure to make a token before we get the +1 counters. Opponent can now start deploying their own Virtue. And yeah, the flying threats are still a pretty big problem. Our opponent can find pretty cheap interaction, like Make Disappear to counter our 6-drop, which does not feel great. So our opponent getting back Danik, still one unknown in hand, and we can finally play our god if we'd like. And yeah, I think we go for it. We'll get triple the wedding announcement token here. Do we want to attack? Can trade for Danik. And then grow the rest of our team, but we really want to make tokens here with the wedding announcement, so I don't think we want to attack with more than one creature. At which point, do we still bother attacking? Yeah, it's probably fine. Alright, so triple the tokens. And hopefully we can present lethal next turn, forcing the opponent to trade off some creatures. Now with the Spellbook Vendor, we don't get to make multiple role tokens, since our god specifically says creature tokens, whereas Mondrak can double any token, including our sorcerer role. So we're at 4, bat up to a 4/4 now, discarding Schooner and a couple lines. And Destroy Evil transforms our god into a land, generates a clue as well for Danik. We can transform this back pretty easily, but I think our opponent will be able to survive our incoming attack. Well, I guess they didn't have Virtue of Loyalty here, so they don't get to untap their team. And we've got a Spellbook Vendor for 1 more point. Attack all out is all we can do. Don't need Courtyard. And then now we can activate our Temple as well. And our opponent falls to 1 exactly. So 1 point short. So close. GG's. Yeah, I think if our opponent just went with Virtue of Loyalty instead of trying to take out our god, that probably would have worked out better. But they got there nonetheless. So moving to game 2 here, can get a bit more info from the opponent's deck. Main deck Destroy Evil is not great to see, since we're packing quite a few enchantments. So against Esper, our own Destroy Evil seems pretty useful, deals with Raffine and their enchantments like Virtue and Wedding Announcement. Don't think the Financier's doing a whole lot for us, so that can go. Protector, also not at its best, since it's not like the opponent heavily uses their graveyard for anything, but it might be better than a Planeswalker like Elspeth, which is going to be under pressure from a bunch of flying creatures. So I think Elspeth is sort of weak here, and then could see an argument for Rabble Rousing being a little clunky. At least Warden's a nice flying blocker. Maybe cut down 1 copy of the god, and then bring in some more interaction. Ossification also looks good. Shield of Argive could also be reasonable, as it can make it awkward for the opponent to use their counter spells. So I might want a few of those. Yeah, let's try them over Protector. Just go all out. Although it is legendary, of course, so drawing multiples could be a little awkward. So maybe we'll go 2 on 1. And then I need to make 1 more cut. Is there anything else in the sideboard that I like? Seal from Existence is fine, although a little bit pricey. Does have the advantage of also going after the opponent's vehicle, which we cannot exile with Ossification, but we've got some more instant speed removal that can help. so I'm not too concerned. And then maybe shave a Spellbook Vendor since we added a bunch of 2-drops. Yeah, something like this seems okay. Could also see cutting the Eternal Wanderer, which is also going to suffer from some of the same weaknesses as Archangel Elspeth. And we'll be on the play. Well, that's a mulligan. This we can keep. And then Sanctuary Warden is pretty far from getting cast. And we'll make a token, I'll just do it now. Now, being on the play, I could have potentially kept in the 4th Spellbook Vendor and cut a removal spell. Removal gets a little bit better if we're on the draw, when we can kind of answer the opponent's threats as they come out. For now, I'm still happy to Ossification. Exile Denix so it doesn't come back. Although we will have to watch out for instant speed enchantment removal, like Destroy Evil, making a 2-3 out of nowhere. But now with the Wandering Emperor, we can maybe pump up our Knight as well. Don't have a great answer to an opposing wedding announcement. And yeah, there it is. Alright, there's our answer. So I think we just deal with it as soon as we can, before they can accumulate more value. Suppose I could wait and see what they've got next, since we can pay for Make Disappear unless it's with Casualty. So I'll just do it now. And then I'm not gonna Ossification, just for a token here. Well, we're pretty light on cards in hand after a mulligan being on the play. So we'll need to try and generate some value with our own wedding announcement, for instance. Rafine follows up their wedding announcements, can grow the token. And I don't mind a trade, since Wandering Emperor still doesn't get past Rafine. We can trade and then maybe Ossification, Rafine, take it from there. Reason to keep our Knight is if we play Virtue of Loyalty, we want some creatures we can start growing. Alright, so I could play Virtue of Loyalty, and then that's a bit more mana efficient than just going for Ossification here. And then next turn we can maybe double spell Emperor and Ossification. Alright, Bat's gonna have a look, so that can take away the Ossification most likely. And then Rafine may not attack. Opponent takes Emperor instead. So we can get it back by exiling the Bat. But then we won't be able to play Emperor and pay the ward as well, assuming we draw land. Eternal Wanderer is going to be good too. So yeah, we've got an interesting decision here. Ossification, try and get back our Wandering Emperor. Rafine gets to keep going. Or we can exile Rafine, which they may not have a 3rd copy in hand. And then opponent could have a Make Disappear with Casualty, but then they would still lose a creature in the process. I think we still try and get our Planeswalker back. Rafine's attacking, which implies that they have something in mind for Wandering Emperor. Could be another Bat, could be a counterspell. Okay, so now we can play Emperor and pay 2 for potential Make Disappear. Although I wouldn't be able to then also exile Rafine, although I guess it would resolve first. But yeah, if we main phase Emperor, it would be with the intention of making a token. Then it can finish off Emperor by just attacking. And even though we get to grow the token, it might just get removed here. So it's a tricky spot. Could also pass and then wait to act until the opponent's turn, although then we miss out on the +1 counter. But it does feel like they've got interaction available here. But maybe we're just happy with playing this now. If they don't counter it, then I can pay the ward and just be satisfied with answering Rafine. Even if then I can now finish off Emperor. So our Virtue of Loyalty hasn't done a whole lot so far. Going back to the trade for the Knight token. Keeping the Knight around could have paid off. But then our opponent also would have been able to connive a bit more with Rafine. And now Sunfall's next. Our opponent's likely hanging on to their own Wandering Emperor, I would say. Or just a counterspell. I think I'd rather have Sunfall countered than the Eternal Wanderer. So I'll start here. And exiling Danik is never a bad idea. Sunfall would have been a little bit more useful earlier when our opponent had multiple creatures out, but we did manage to get rid of a Make Disappear. So it's still anyone's game, but definitely advantage opponents. They've got a few more cards in hand. Alright, Smithy is now an option too. It's not going to be very large, since we don't have any creatures or artifacts in play. But it's a start. And then we can start growing the token with Virtue of Loyalty. And then kind of see if the coast is clear for Eternal Wanderer. So now we've got a blocker for Danik. Ooh, a Gix's Command to get stuff back from the graveyard here. Nope, just going for Destroy and +1 counters. It's not too bad. And so that was a great top deck. Just exile Danik right now. So it doesn't come back. And hopefully we get to untap with a Planeswalker, maybe even deploy a second one. Opponent is looking at the graveyard. Of course, Gix's Command makes sense against the tokens deck. Destroying each creature with power 2 or less. Just not the way this game has shaped up. So they might have another one in hand for all we know. Opponent passes. And we've got options here. I think I still go for Eternal Wanderer. Bit more mana efficient. They didn't seem to have counter spells earlier. And then we can put a +1 counter on the Samurai. Opponent maybe just top decked another Make Disappear. That's too bad. So Virtue of Loyalty still looking for a friend. And Lord Skitter can help them go wide now. Luckily we don't care too much about our graveyard. And a vendor's not bad either. So announcement, vendor, pay the 1. And I'll make a Samurai.
Let your blade do the talking.
Okay, so now we finally get to assemble a bit of a board. Smithy still requires 5 creatures or artifacts to be tapped. So that's not happening yet. And yep, second Gix's Command was to be expected. So we're left with a Spellbook Vendor versus Lord Skitter, which they can make indestructible with the Plaza. So I can trade Vendor for the opponent's land pretty much, which is not an exciting prospect. I think I'd rather keep the Vendor around. Grow it up to a 4/4 so we can actually block Lord Skitter going forward.
Years of training for this.
Attack. Could have also used the Courtyard first, I suppose, since now the Scry might go a bit to waste. That one we won't be able to hit with our Courtyard. So, probably put that on the bottom. And we had an ossification, which is just gonna prompt a Plaza activation. Still seems worth it as opposed to exiling a token. Alright, so we're starting to pull ahead now with our wedding announcement. And Cavern Band doesn't have anything to exile. Fateful Absence, we don't need to use just yet. Happy making more tokens with the announcement anyway. Okay, pass it back. And now we don't need to worry about Plaza protecting one of their legendaries. And it's mostly something like Rafine that could be problematic. And just a bat attacking, we'll take it. And another vendor. And that's enough for a concession, awesome. So yeah, we got there in the end. How do we want to adjust for game 3? Did not get to see our Shield of Argive in action, but yeah, opponent kept in their counter spells, so it seems good. Now that we're on the draw, Farewell might go up in value slightly, since we might be behind on board. Planeswalkers like Elspeth get even worse now on the draw. But yeah, could still see Eternal Wanderer coming in handy, especially for opponents relying on sweepers like Gix's Command. Having Planeswalkers that can kind of re-establish a board is important. And then, yeah, still happy with Mondrak, I think. Haven't seen too many removal spells that exile our creatures, which would be a strike against it. And Rabble Rousing also gets worse if we're expecting a lot of Gix's Command. So all in all, still relatively happy with our setup. One God. Opponent did have a few go for the throats that can easily take it out in addition to the counters. So yeah, this seems fine. Alright, so we start on the draw here for the final game. A 2-lander could be a little rough, but we do have Vendor, which can maybe help scrying to more lands eventually. So I'll give it a shot. And at least we've got the early interaction, so we don't fall too far behind. The Bat can have a look. Takes Vendor. So now I'm kind of forced to Ossification. If I keep up Destroy Evil, it's not like I can take out a Rafine, since we can't pay the ward. So it made sense for them to take Vendor, since it was the odd one out. A Lord Skitter's also potentially a problem. So we can Ossification once again, play tapped Courtyard, and then still have Destroy Evil for Rafine or maybe Shieldred if that shows up. Loran to destroy Ossification. Yep, that's a good one. Although there are certainly more impactful enchantments in our deck that it could destroy. And our opponent's not sure if they want Skitter or a Bat. We're just hoping for an untapped land next turn, so we can maybe deploy our Shield of Argive and shut down any future counter spells. And our opponent's going for the Bat, so they might take our 4-drop here. Or they could take Vendor, which is threatening to become a 3/3. And yep, goes for our Legend. did find a land. So now Smithy is also an option, or we could double spell Vendor and Virtue, which I kind of prefer. And I'll main phase both. Even though Vendor doesn't get immediate value, which is maybe a reason to sequence a little differently, it's just that the token from Smithy is not a particularly exciting blocker. At least not yet. And then next turn, with a land, we could either Smithy pay the 1 or play Virtue. And now it's time for Rafine, in which we can destroy evil. Don't think I should trade for Loran, since we've got this Virtue of Loyalty and Smithy wanting us to keep our creatures in play. They still know about Destroy Evil, so they'll maybe be looking for a second Rafine. And yeah, for now take 5. Find another Smithy. Okay, so take out Rafine versus play Smithy. I think we take out Rafine, then I can also pay the 1 from Vendor. Now another strategy is to wait until the bat gets large enough for it to die to the Destroy Evil and get our Shield of Argive back. Although then Rafine still gets to keep growing and potentially get out of hand. Although racing a 3/3 lifelinker is also kinda tough. Of course our opponent doesn't need to play into the Destroy Evil, they can just keep it as a 3/3. So counting on the opponent to make a mistake might not be the best approach. And we'll grow the knights. And do we want to land? It does let me play Virtue of Loyalty, but we really need to find an answer to the bat, which we're not gonna outrace at the moment. Although maybe a land is still worth it, letting me play Smithy plus pay 1 more for Vendor if it survives. And eventually play Virtue. And then once we secure our 5th land, we can look for more interaction. Opponent actually drawing with Loran, so glad I kept the land on top now. They might be holding Gix's command once again, which doesn't line up all that well. And there's ossification. So that's a way to answer the bat. Although, do I actually play it right now? Would be a play we can make alongside Vendor. If our opponent's got a Make disappear, they can easily sacrifice the Rat token to counter with Casualty. So I might prefer developing my board with a Smithy first, and then take it from there. Opponent's got to Make disappear, that's fine. And we'll pay the 1. And I Gunja deals with the Vendor. That's fair. Do we want land number 6? Would let me play Smithy and Ossification, including Ossification first, being able to pay for Make disappear with Casualty. So I don't hate it. It's gonna be awkward if our opponent plays a second bat to snipe the Ossification. In which case we would want to find a sweeper. And our opponent draws with Loran once again. And Shieldred's next. Was bound to make an appearance. Okay, Fateful Absence could be an answer. So we've got 2 creatures we really want to deal with. Shieldred I can at least maybe block on the ground for a turn. So it might be Ossification the Bat first. And see what the response is. Whereas if I let the opponent untap, I guess Plaza of Heroes becomes an issue there too, whereas Bat doesn't have that protection. So that is a reason to still take out Shieldred first. Let's try that then. That resolves. Shieldred down, can attack. And then I think I tap out for Smithy here. Sanctuary Warden would be a good draw. Now it's also reasonable to Fateful Absence, and then if they counter with Casualty, we can follow up with Warden, which would still block the bat. So I'll just pass for now. And Bat wants to attack. And let's see if this works. And there's a Make Disappear with Casualty, as we suspected. So won't be able to pay for it. So yeah, hoping that the Warden can stick the landing, because it's our only hope. Start by attacking in case that changes the opponent's play. And do I want to land? Not really. Does it resolve? Shield counter is protected from spot removal, but not a bound spell if they have a Soaring City in hand. Probably safe enough to remove 1 shield counter. And then see for that. Virtue of Loyalty, make a token is beatable. Both get to draw. Alright, so it seems like we're not dead yet. Draw again. And a Wedding Announcement is next. Plus a Danik. So we're setting up to go big with Virtue of Loyalty here. And there's Shield of Argive. So Shield plus Smithy is an option. Could get our Virtue of Loyalty going as well. And then still play Wedding Announcements, maybe prefer that actually. So Warden can attack. And then still probably not removing my shield counter, and wow, opponent concedes, yeah. They felt like they were falling further and further behind. We had a lot of options. And yeah, our Warden manages to stabilize us right on time. Awesome. Okay, so we're back here with a quick recap for this monowhite tokens deck submitted by user Vyvanse, and the deck played quite nicely for us. We can certainly make some adjustments if we're looking to play this in best of 1 as opposed to best of 3, since best of 1 tends to be a bit more hectic and fast-paced than best of 3. So in that case I would suggest maybe adding a few copies of Lay Down Arms to the main deck as a nice 1-mana removal spell that can exile opposing creatures, and we can also take advantage of our mostly plains mana base, so it's pretty easy to add to the deck. And I would also maybe add some copies of Ossification to the main deck as more cheap interaction. Don't need to go with all 4 copies since we still have a nice split of Get Lost and Fateful Absence, but I just like having my cheap removal, especially when facing those more aggressive decks. The Financier we didn't get to see in action, but seems a little bit weak in overall power level compared to some of the other cards in the deck, so I don't feel too bad cutting that one. And then going over to the 4-drops, we might have a few too many. If we look at our curve, there's kind of a spike at 4 mana, so we might have a few too many hands where we've got multiple 4-drops in hand without deploying a 3-drop on curve, so I would try to address that by maybe cutting a few copies of the Protector, maybe go down on the smithy as well. Could also cut a Mondrag since it is legendary after all, and this way our 4-drops look a little bit more balanced. Also, if we want to keep having the Protector in the main deck, could still be a great sideboard card as a graveyard hate, of course, but if we're keeping it in the main deck, I would also maybe look to add some fetch lands in our mana base, even though we don't need to fix our colors. Just by having a fetch land that ends up in our graveyard, we've got a land we can now exile with a Protector, so now every time we play a land, we can also generate a human token, so that can also be a neat interaction. And then especially if we're going to have a few gaps in our curve, then playing a tap land can work out just fine. And then looking at some of the top end cards, they're all quite powerful, of course. Virtue also doubling as a 2-drop, so I don't mind maxing out on Virtue of Loyalty actually, just because it's pretty flexible. Rabble Rousing can be a little slow in the more aggressive metas, but of course a ton of fun if it goes off. Can maybe keep one in the main deck, and then I would also look to maybe shave one of the 6-drops since we have a few too many at the moment, and even though it won us that final game, we can maybe move a Sanctuary Warden to the sideboard and be left with our God and then Eternal Wonder for a bit of diversity. So yeah, this build might be a little bit better suited for the best of 1 meta. There's also ways to fill out the 3-drops with cards like Adeline if we're looking to be a bit more aggressive. 3 Blind Mice is also an option to make lots of 1/1 tokens that can then also synergize with cards like Mondrag and Ojer Taq. So there's no shortage of options when it comes to building a monowhite tokens deck in Standard. But for now, I want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.